I always think nobody's the bad guy in their own in their own internal monologue.
Yeah.
Nobody goes into work thinking, oh, you know what? I'm really going to piss Jerry off today.
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to do. He's going to ask me this question, which I know he's going to ask, and I'm going to get him. I would say 99.5% of people go to work, do a good job, and to work well with the people around them.
Can I just say one thing there? I love what you said there as well. This is how it makes me feel, because that's so important, because no one can argue with an emotion. No one can argue with the way you made me feel. You could argue about, I did that night, but that's how you made me feel. So yeah, no, I'll go with you on where we need to go next. But
I'm a big emotional guy. I can't hold it back.
This episode is brought to you by Instant Impact. Instant Impact provides transformative talent solutions to small and mid-sized companies that are making between 30 and 500 hires each year. If your recruitment's giving you a headache and you don't know where to start, then give the team at Instant Impact a call or visit www.instant-impact.com for more information.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About HR. I'm your host, Felix Mitchell. Humans are, it seems, genetically pre-programmed to be rubbish recruiters. We love to hang around with people who are like us. We are chock-a-block full of bias, and we distrust difference. Above all of that, we're incredibly persistent as a species. When it became inappropriate to hire only from your social network and people who went to the same university as you, we invented the concept of cultural fit and the team fit interview, just to ensure that an objective hiring process doesn't end up with someone who we don't like. Luckily, we are also, I think, a passionate species, and we're trying to create that fair assessment process and to remove as much of that inherent bias from the interview process as is possible. Our guest today is Pete Cooper. He is the author of Better Human Blueprint, and he's passionate about helping companies to hire more fairly and to help people find what truly motivates them. Pete, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Really pleased to be here.
Now, in this book, you talk about a lot of really interesting things, but one of the things that you sort of zero in on is diversity specifically, not just from an ethical perspective, but also as something that's right for business. Can you just talk us through that business case for diversity? That's a really good place to start this conversation.
Yeah, sure. I think it is a really interesting one, because hopefully by now everyone gets the social justice, the moral case for diversity. If you do, we've probably not got time to go into the reasons. If not, that's another episode. But in terms of the business case, look, it's not just the right thing to do. We know that diverse teams perform better. It is that simple. Time and time again, research is showing that. And what that means is when teams are different in the way that they think. So we have this phrase, which is cognitive diversity. So we talk about diversity in terms of demographic diversity and cognitive diversity. So demographic diversity is what we typically think about when we talk about diversity. Cognitive diversity is, do we think differently? So you can have two people who look completely different, but if they've had the same educational background, if they've gone to the same school, gone to the same university, heard the same lecturers, they're going to think the same. So although demographically they'll be diverse, cognitively they're going to think the same. So actually that's not cognitive diversity. And you can have two people who look the same, but have had completely different educational backgrounds, and they're going to think differently. So that's where we get the cognitive diversity. So we want to get both forms of diversity. That diversity coupled with psychological safety, where we're bringing in ideas and we're encouraging that diversity of thought, is what we're striving for.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think the two get conflated quite a lot. And when I think back and I hear people making the business case for demographic diversity, it's often, it's picked in a couple of ways, but it's often more explained in the value of having people who think differently than it is in, any of the specific impact that having people from different demographic backgrounds would have for your organization. So do you think enough has been said about cognitive diversity, specifically around how people think?
No. And I think it's because There's two ways of looking at it. One is it's really obvious, so why do we need to talk about it? But I think it's not obvious. And I think that probably the second point is maybe people are a little bit scared of this topic because it's a bit like we have to say there is the obvious case for diversity and there's more to it. So there's a really interesting study a while ago. I'm not great at names and numbers and things like that. I should be better. I'm not. There's a really interesting study where they got two groups from different cultures. So a Western culture, quite an individualistic culture, and an Eastern culture, which is more collectivist. So thinking about the group. And they asked these two groups to look at an image, it was effectively a painting, and describe it. And you think, okay, well, you should get quite similar answers. What they actually found, I think it was a scene of sort of an aquarium. And what the researchers found was individuals from that collectivist culture described a more zoomed out view. Individuals from the individualistic culture described individual features of the things that were going on. So you've got two groups looking at the same thing, seeing things completely different. So you go back to that level of, okay, hang on. So it's not even about the minutiae of the detail. You can look at things completely different. And the scary thing, and Matthew Syed talks about this, is a brilliant book that he talks about called Rebel Ideas. And it gets dangerous to the point of, with the 9/11 disasters, we had all the information we needed to stop it, but we didn't have the cognitive diversity to notice things that in that religion were very, very significant, but to a westernized view weren't significant. They saw an individual dressed in rags sitting in a cave, missed key triggers because we didn't understand that culture.
So underestimated the importance of what they were picking up on chatter because they had, I assume, gang units or FBI units, CIA units who were more used to going after local. It was the war on drugs, right? Before it was the war on terror.
That's it. It's things we miss. And, it's no criticism of any one individual. It's about recognizing, well, what...
It's Jerry. Jerry
That's
in the
it.
CIA.
You missed it. But no, it's not that. And Matthew Syed talks about it brilliantly. It's about, what are we just not seeing because we don't have that impact? And then you apply that. I can guarantee that 99% of us aren't looking at things that critical to life. But what are we missing in our own businesses and our own hiring practices because we're just not seeing that different perspective?
And I guess it goes beyond, it goes a little bit beyond that, right? I think we're so used to whacking people into a job title or into a little box that maybe we miss some of the benefit that could be had from understanding how people think. And not meaning to tee up the book too much, but I wonder whether, actually maybe I am. I wonder how much we all understand the way that we think in a way that we can actually, like before we even before we even move on to how those in our team think, how those in the organization think. What would you say is the general level of self-awareness to our own strengths, the way that our own minds function?
That's a brilliant question. I think it's massively varied. We brought in things like 360-degree feedback for a reason, and there are strengths and weaknesses to that kind of thing, ironically, because of what it is. But I think it's low. We talk about the Dunning-Kruger effect. So we do talk about, which I will go on to explain, have no fear. So the Dunning-Kruger effect, better known as people being too stupid to realize they're stupid.
Nice.
And you might come across that. So that came about as a brilliant, the brilliant piece here was there was a guy who tried to rob a bank, and he was really sure he was going to get away with this because he'd covered his face in lemon juice. And he believed that this lemon juice was going to protect him from the CCTV cameras. Now, shockingly, it didn't work. But he believed it was going to work. And that's the kind of effect of the Dunning-Kruger effect, is that you don't know what you don't know, basically. So we start, and we can go into all kinds of, and I tend not to talk in models and things. I think it's more important about what does that actually mean for you. You don't know what you don't know. So actually, let's start there. And then we can... How often do we think about the way that we think? Not often at all. So it's about that stimulus. response gap. And to call back to one of your previous episodes around that sort of intent and actions and the difference there. So it's getting into the depths of that before we even dream to think we might understand how other people think.
Absolutely. That's the episode with Steve Weiner, I believe, which is really, really interesting one for anyone that wants to tune in. So what are some of the I wonder, let's keep it practical. I know that I think that's really helpful. What are some of the things that we can do as individuals to better understand how we think? And then compound question, which you're not supposed to do on podcasting. I'm maverick.
I'll roll with it.
And then once we understand how we think, how can we then apply that to our personal and professional lives to be helpful?
It's a really interesting one. There's loads. And at risk of teeing up my own book, there's lots in there about the practical activities. I think quite simply, it's reflective practice. So this is something that's practiced a lot in the medical field. So it's just spending some time after an event thinking about how did I come across? How did I think and react in that situation? So the massive thing that underpins self-awareness is this stimulus response gap, right? So there's loads talked about this. This is about, do we respond or do we react to a situation? Now, a lot of people, you start hearing phrases like, I couldn't help it, I just react. Couldn't help it, I just did that, I just said that. It's a complete load of rubbish. Mm. You respond to every single stimulus you receive. Now, it might be sort of an unconscious response. The only things we are not responding to, or we're not choosing to respond, is like when we put our hand on something hot and we pull it away. But if we fire off a text to our partner, a stroppy text that we fire off, and then that evening, I'm really sorry I didn't think about that. Yes, you did. You thought about it because you put the words together. So it's getting in that gap and just, so there's that big piece about take a breath, and I'm not going to sit here and talk about breathing exercises. But what I'm going to encourage everyone to do is just take some time to reflect and think about, what was I trying to achieve and did I manage it? And then for you, it's working out how do you widen the gap. So we're in London, mind the gap. Like, what is going on in that space? How do we mind the gap? That's the big piece. There's loads of models with reflective practice. So it's what can I do differently? What happened? What was I thinking? The other piece I will say about how you can practice this and how you can apply this then to pick up that sort of secondary question is then about sort of forward modeling that. So I talk about this a lot. I have a phrase that you can never get angry for someone behaving the way that they always behave, right? Mm-hmm. Someone behaves that way once, fine, it's on them. Someone behaves repeatedly, you need to change your response to that. So what I'd say in sort of personal, professional lives, if you've got someone that always triggers you, always does something, it could be a client, it could be a candidate, it could be, you know something's going to happen, then visualize it. Spend some time in the morning, I've got to meet such and such. Hopefully not Jared again, hopefully we've got someone else. But that person, they always do this thing that annoys me. What can I do ahead of time? What am I going to do? And it might be as simple as, I don't know, it's all over the place, but right now this is a stressful conversation. I'm just going to go and get a quick glass of water. That's mine in the cup. But reflective practice and then forward model that. That would be my big thing.
I love that. And I think on the forward modeling piece, I think so often the answer is to talk to the person about that impact they're having on you. I always think nobody's the bad guy in their own in their own internal monologue.
Yeah.
Nobody goes into work thinking, you know what, I'm really going to piss Jerry off today.
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to do. He's going to ask me this question, which I know he's going to ask, and I'm going to get him. I would say 99.5% of people go to work to do a good job and to work well with the people around them.
Absolutely.
So often I've had those conversations with people that I've been gearing myself up for ages, like, he or she's going to really hate this. I say, look, when you do that, this is how it makes me feel. Like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, I had no idea. And catch me out on it if I do it again.
Yeah.
So I think that's all right. We got a bit off topic. We were talking about.
Can I just say one thing though? I love what you said there as well. This is how it makes me feel, because that's so important. Because no one can argue with an emotion. No one can argue with the way you made me feel. You could argue about I did that night, but that's how you made me feel. So yeah, no, I'll go with you on where we need to go next. But
I'm a big emotional guy. I can't hold it back. Great. So we've gone a long way on the cognitive diversity piece, but I think it was really important to sort of really understand your own way of thinking.
Yeah.
Can help you, and therefore, once you understand yourself, if you understand others, how it can help create a sort of more inclusive environment for people. So I wonder how that plays out in the actual recruitment process. What are the barriers to getting that right and to create a fair and inclusive recruitment process?
I think the first thing is we never assume what others are thinking. So we've talked about our own thought process there. We just need to ask is the simple one. Ask the question is the simple. It's the simplest one. When we're talking about the barriers to diversity, though, there's three: bias, prejudice, discrimination. They're your three categories. And I'm a big fan of signposting to other people's work who phrase this really well. So Kim Scott, come across her, she's fantastic in this space.
Fierce Conversations?
Radical Candor. Kim Scott, you were so close. So Radical Candor, but so that's brilliant. And if you want anything on feedback models and things, check that out. She did a second book called Just Work, which is about prejudice in the workplace and things like that. But she describes this in the most simple way I've ever come across, which I love. So, bias is not meaning it. Prejudice is meaning it. Discrimination is being mean.
I love that.
Simple. Not meaning it, being mean. So if we take it down and we look at bias, so what actually is bias? Bias is preference, right? And it's things that we can talk about. And often what organizations do is they sit you on your first week in front of your 45-minute e-learning on unconscious bias training, which does not work.
What?
Shock horror. The e-learning in your first week alongside everything else. That's another rant that we won't go on. Unconscious bias. And again, it's a brilliant guy called John Amici. Fantastic guy. Come across him, wrote Promises of Giants. He phrases it better in terms of unconscious bias. Think about it as an entrenched assumption. And the problem that he has, and I totally agree with him, the unconscious bias is we hear those words and we think, oh, I can't do anything about it. It's unconscious. No. Everyone has unconscious bias. You don't get to say you don't have it. But what it's about in challenging those processes, making sure that that doesn't become discrimination. Mm-hmm. So if we go, we don't mean it. So if I said to you, it's a stereotypical example, but if I said to you, doctor, nurse, you are not a bad person if you think doctor's probably a man, nurse is probably a woman, right? You're not a bad person. You're a bad person if a male nurse comes in and you doubt his credibility, or a female doctor. That's when it becomes prejudice. Mm. So it's about recognizing that and going, okay, I'm sure there are some great unconscious bias training out there, but the evidence isn't stacking up that that's doing much. Prejudice is then about being mean. So there's a great research study, and this came from the 70s. We're getting a lot better, so you can hear the 70s in terms of how far we're back. But the orchestras. So I don't know if you've heard this example before, but probably your listeners may well not have done. In the 70s, orchestra auditions. There was a real gender discrepancy in orchestras, predominantly male. And there was a commonly spoken about belief, so we get from prejudice to discrimination, that men are better musicians. That was well known. And it was, and it was okay at that time because it was, our orchestras are made up of men, so obviously men are better musicians, and that was at the time. Changed one thing, did a study. Orchestra auditions, they put a curtain up so you couldn't see who was doing it. And people weren't allowed to wear high heels because, I guess the men that probably in the 70s weren't many men wearing high heels. All of a sudden, more women started to get through the interview rounds. All that changed, there was a curtain up. So we start to see there that it's not about musical ability, it's prejudice discrimination. And then we get into discrimination, which is active in terms of we know that's against the law. So we fight, we see things like must have 15 years of experience. Well, we know that that's indirect discrimination. So we need to go against this. I challenged an organisation recently. I think it was just an over-eager hiring manager who'd written, our guy will be. No, we don't use that language. And to me, it wasn't meant, but there's a bit of an education piece. I think then, told you it's a big answer.
This is great.
I think one of the biggest things then, they're kind of the obvious things. We go into name blind hiring. We go into anonymized applications. There's a bit of debate here. Another brilliant author speaks out against this in terms of actually just anonymizing applications. We're not tackling the discrimination, the prejudice. We're almost hiding it away. I think we need to recognize, for me, I think it's still an important step. You take away your demographic data. We need to think about, right, where are the wins? How can we move the dial forwards?
I agree with you, by the way, and I think one of the big things that we believe at Instant Impact is we can't wait for a whole generation of essentially these biases and even prejudices that have been created by the culture we consume. Absolutely. Can't wait for that to wash through, by which time new biases and new prejudices will have been created. So I think taking practical, active steps to get to the right outcome is an absolute must-have, because it removes the excuse.
Exactly. And there's some of the sort of the systematic things. And then there's two real practical steps that I think we can look for. And there's one which we kind of already talked about, which is, can we stop hiring for team fit and think about cultural contribution? So actually, how does this person add something that I don't already have? It is not important that your new hire can play golf with you on a Sunday morning. I don't care. There's no actual evidence that liking each other in a team links to better performance. You just need to be able to work with people. So if you're at each other's throats the whole time and you're not working, there's a problem, yes. That's a different rabbit hole we can go down.
Is there, because your psychology background,
yep.
Is there an organizational psychology background, I should say, is there an ideal mix of cognitive behaviors for each activity that team's doing? So for example, if you're building a sales team, is it great to have people who are, 3/4 of your team who think in a specific way and 1/4 that thinks another?
I've not come across it. And note my language there. There might be others who really specialize in this area and would say yes in this, but there's so many psychometrics out there. I think what you're looking for, when I work with teams, what I focus much more on is, have we got a shared purpose? Have we got shared values? And have we operationalized those? So behaviors. Are we all pulling in the same direction? And do we have that psychologically safe climate that we can think differently? So we talk a lot of things. I've got a massive issue with misunderstanding around extroversion and introversion. And introverts are not shy. That's a complete misunderstanding. Introverts, it takes a lot more energy to engage with people. But you might have your introverts who are excellent in that scenario. They just need some time to recharge away from people. So there will be some evidence that different personality characteristics linked to certain professions and things like that. It's not my area of specialty, so there may well be other research out there, just covering myself in case something else happens. But I think it's far more important to get that shared mission and purpose. Are we all pulling in the same direction? Have we got the climate that we can challenge each other constructively?
No, we don't have the time to get into mission and purpose. That's, again, another whole podcast. But you mentioned behaviors.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. Because I would imagine you have a set of shared behaviors.
Yep.
Does that contradict having people who think differently?
Not for me, because it's about what we pull together. So a behavior could be we think differently. In terms of what is it that we're pulling together. So now you and I are working on a shared behavior right now, that we respect each other and we're giving each other space to talk. For instance, we haven't sat before this call and gone, right, here's what we're going to do, or this recording, I should say. It's nice to be in person.
There you go. You're so used to doing things.
Exactly. No, it's just that. It's a trench assumption. But I think it's just a thing about, right, shared behavior of what I'd be doing with teams, and what I do with teams is making sure there's that shared behavior around. We do think differently. We challenge each other, because the enemy of cognitive diversity is groupthink, right? So groupthink is when it's more important to maintain consensus than get the right answer. And if you've been in a team for 10 years and the faces are the same and you've hired to fit, you're going to be going down and down and down, because people are too scared to give you the right answer because they want their face to fit.
I wonder where I'm seeing that play out on the global stage.
No comment.
Let's move on.
And I just want to tell you back, because I didn't answer a little bit. So the second part around practical tools in terms of the hiring thing, that I'd really encourage people to think about. It was an EY model that first came up with it, is this preference traditional requirement. So if you've come across
No,
this.
I haven't.
So it's a really, really helpful way of looking at job applications, so job adverts, but also internal progression mechanisms. And there's loads of stuff we can talk about there. But have a look at anything you're asking for and ask yourself, is it a preference, is it a tradition, or is it a requirement? So if you've got someone and you're saying, I don't know, must be a team player, whatever that means, or, I really want an extrovert. How many times I imagine when you've been recruiting for people, maybe on a bigger scale, but I really want someone who's big, loud, who's going to raise the energy in the team. It's probably a preference, Must have a red brick university education. Right?
I think that less and less.
Less and less. We're getting there. We still see some form of that. That's a tradition. We don't need that. What we need is the skills that come from that. Or is it a requirement? It's a software engineer, must know how to work with software languages. Right? Requirement. Preference, tradition, requirement. That's a big step forward I think we could take.
Preference, tradition, requirement. That is such a good framework. I absolutely love that. Now, I wonder if we can talk. I'm just having got an eye on time. I really want to make sure that we have enough time to get into the difference between equity and equality.
Yep.
It's really important. And I'm not 100% sure that I've got a nuanced understanding of it. So I wonder if you could just give us the breakdown.
Yeah, absolutely. You said you have kids.
I do.
Yes. Ages for me?
2 and 4, both boys.
2 and 4 boys. Okay, perfect. So you go to the cinema at the weekend, right? Whether you do or not is relevant. In this example,
I'd love to.
You'd love to.
With them or without them?
With them.
Okay.
With them. A 2-year-old in the cinema. You can tell I'm not a parent, but we'll try and make this work. You sit down at the cinema, and there's 3 of me sat in front of you. I'm 6'4", right? You can see past me because the rump seat isn't, but your 2 boys can't. Equality says you all get treated the same. So I get all 3 of you a high chair because you all get treated the same. You can still see 4-year-old maybe can see, 2-year-old's got no chance. Equity says everyone gets the same opportunity. You don't get a high chair because you can already see. Your 4-year-old gets the high chair, he can see. Your 2-year-old gets a high chair plus a cushion. So you've all got different things. You've all been treated differently, but you can all see the screen. That's equity. You all get the same opportunity.
Very helpful and great analogy. 1 floor. Yeah. I am 5'8.5". So
all right, you get out of the chair as well.
I still need at least a cushion, even with a ramp floor. So no, we're cooking on gas now. That's pretty interesting. So how do you see that playing out in the workplace?
Yeah, exactly. So the biggest one I like to use is internal progression opportunities. So I've seen many different approaches to this, and I think it's really important that businesses get this right. So we're not just in sort of dead man's shoe situations where we're waiting for the next role above to become available. We know with lattice careers, whatever language you want to use, we're looking for more internal movement. I've seen organizations design internal progression mechanisms that say, right, you're going to come and do an interview. How does that make any sense if your job has nothing to do with interviews? If you're not presenting, maybe you're a coder, you're a software engineer, software developer, and you're coding all day. How does it make any sense for you to have to present? Doesn't. Maybe it does for some roles. So equity versus equality. So equality, there's this misconception that fairness means everyone gets treated the same. It doesn't. Fairness means, for me, equity, everyone gets the same opportunity. So if you have an internal progression board, if you have interviews, equity means someone who is comfortable interviewing, absolutely interviews. Someone who has an additional need, or is maybe just very nervous in interview settings, maybe they can record this. Maybe that they can submit a written essay, for instance. What is it? So we're applying the same rigor, we're applying the same evidence-based selection criteria, all that fairness, all that validity doesn't go away, but we're giving everybody the same opportunity. So it's extra time for someone with dyslexia. That's what equity looks like in the sort of the worlds that you and I inhabit.
That's really interesting to think about it that way. There's essentially what you're saying is spend a little bit more time asking what it is we need.
Yeah.
And then rather than and a little less time thinking about how people are going to demonstrate that. So really what you're saying is, okay, for someone to do well in this job, they need to demonstrate, or someone to get hired, they need to demonstrate that they're a fantastic coder, that they can drive a team, and that they can speak Spanish.
Yep.
And instead of, and spend more time thinking about those things than, right, we're going to do an interview that's asking these questions. And maybe we could say to them, look, here are the things you need to demonstrate. How are you best going to demonstrate those things?
Yeah, I love that. Absolutely love that. And we've started to see this a bit, right? In terms of organizations are choosing to provide interview questions ahead of time. Is that good for some? Yes. It opens up all sorts of questions, but to me, it's just about having an adult view of these things. What we need to make sure is we're having a fair selection criteria. But it's the Einstein quote, or whether it's might be mistakenly attributed to Einstein, that whole, everyone's intelligent in their own way. So judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree. He'll spend his life thinking it's stupid. And it's that thing with it, the other quote that goes with it is, it's not about how clever are you, but how are you clever? And it's thinking about those things, and in an assessment scenario or in teams or whatever the scenario is, it's exactly that in terms of what do we actually need and how can someone demonstrate they have it. The sort of the criticism you often hear back from businesses, from hiring managers is, well, how do we make sure everyone's going through the same process? I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in a fair process where everyone gets a chance to demonstrate. So you see it actually, and I'm thinking about this analogy off the top of my head, so let's see if it works. But if you look at the Paralympics, for instance, so they have different classifications of athletes depending on their disability. So you can have some people running or swimming in the same race with different finish times based on the nature of their classification. That makes sense. As long as we've got the right level of rigor around it, it's not, throw everything up, see what happens. But it is about making sure it's fair, it's equitable.
Yeah, and I guess the thing that you need to be absolutely crystal on, because I can already hear some people listening being like, well, I'm looking for a salesperson. A salesperson needs to be able to think on their feet. In fact, it's to that point around preference, traditional requirement.
Exactly.
That is a requirement of that role.
Fine.
In which case, you test for it.
Exactly that.
Cool. I'm on board. Perfect. I get it. And that is, on that bombshell, that is all we've got time for. Pete, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.